Hello! I've recorded over 24 hours of footage of this dishwasher. And I'm not going to make you watch all of it, but I've gone through most of it and now I know everything there is to know about this Frigidaire dishwasher. If you got here without seeing the main channel video, there's a clicky thing. The purpose of that video, there were two purposes. First, I announced a new dishwasher detergent product that I was very slightly involved in the development of. Really, I was just along for the ride. This is a formulation of Matt Kesey, and he sent it to an ASTM testing lab to be blind tested against two mainstream products, a big name powder and a big name pod. And, well, the main reason I made the video is because I have been vindicated. It doesn't seem like I was wearing such a tinfoil hat anymore, because we now know there's no reason powders cannot be excellent detergent products, and it sure seems like the big name brands are not putting their best foot forward with the powder products they sell. And given that they sell so many different kinds of detergent at wildly different price points, well, you know, they have an incentive to do that. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. But I was right, and I'm very happy to know I was right. So yeah, I really hope that maybe there's gonna be more and better powder options out there, because anybody who's convinced that pods work better than powder, it's not because pods are a better form factor, it's because the manufacturers want it that way. But anywho, the other reason I made that video was because in all the times I've made dishwasher videos, I keep saying, for those of us in North America, you need to run the water until it comes out hot before you start the dishwasher, but I never actually demonstrated the difference that makes. And I did in that video. I also tested, this did not make it into the main video because it got out of hand. I also tested the difference with my personal dishwasher at home between purging the cold water and not purging the cold water. My home has a pretty good run of piping, well, I mean a pretty short run of piping between the water heater and the kitchen sink. It basically just has to cross the garage. And I also suspect those pipes are insulated because the water stays hot for quite a while, even after you haven't used it. So the dishwasher has quite an advantage in my home. But even still, if you don't purge the line, the wash water only gets to about, I closed out of my document for some reason. It didn't quite hit 80 if I didn't purge the line, but if I did purge the line, it hit 95 when the detergent dispenser opened. Because the run of piping is short enough, I actually felt the pipe underneath the sink to see was it getting hot. It got hot before the dishwasher finished filling, but I would estimate it was only hot for about 20 seconds of the filling time. Regardless though, actually purging the cold water meant that the main wash started at 95 degrees, and that also meant it had at least 10 more minutes of effective washing time, because the total amount of time in the main wash where the temperature was above 130 degrees was about 10 minutes longer, maybe a little more, when I had purged the cold water. So it makes a really significant difference, and it's something you really should be doing. If you have not been in the habit of doing that and you think your dishwasher kind of stinks, do that and see what difference it makes. But in making that video, I found the service data sheet, well really, after installing these lights, which I did specifically to figure out what all the cycles do, I found this service data sheet which explains what all the cycles do. That was annoying, but I quickly realized the service data sheet is not quite correct. For one thing, it doesn't show the light wash. It doesn't explain what happens when you modify light wash and energy saver with the high temp option, which you can do. And the timing on the cycle chart is very wrong. The actual sequencing is correct. As far as everything I tested, it's exactly correct with the sequencing, but the cycles are actually much longer than the charts say they are. And I'm assuming that's because the software was revised at some point along this dishwasher's production run. The board says 2009, but I think the actual dishwasher was made in 2012. So yeah, that's probably what that difference is. But because of that difference, I thought, fine, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to film every single one of this dishwasher cycles with a temperature data logger in there, load it up with dishes, and between every time I ran the tests, I also pointed a box fan in there to make sure everything cooled down back to room temperature. This was very thorough. Why did I do this? I don't know, but I did. And now you get to benefit from it. In fact, the people who are really going to benefit from it are those of you out there who have a Frigidaire FFBD2409LS0B. Or probably the last digits are different if you have a white one or a black one. But yeah, if you have this Frigidaire dishwasher, oh boy, this video is for you. But I'm going to start... Well, the thing that I teased in the main channel video was the high temp wash option. And I'm going to show you the difference that that made for the peanut butter test because it was a huge difference. So now I'm just going to let this footage play while I tell you the story of where this dishwasher came from and why I didn't realize this was what it always does when you select high temp wash. So this dishwasher came from my previous home, and the reason why I replaced it and turned it into a experimental machine with a hole in its side was because it was starting to go on the fritz. It would just stop washing in the middle of a cycle. I would open the door and find it full of water, and it wasn't giving any error lights or anything. It just turned off. And very annoyingly, it did that. I seem to recall it did that at least a few times when I made the original videos because I remember having some tests fail. And now it didn't do it ever throughout all this testing. So apparently being unplugged for 5 years fixed something about it. But anyway, the house this came out of had a stupidly long run of piping between the water heater and the kitchen sink. It took over a minute to get hot water at the kitchen sink, which was ridiculous. And because that kitchen sink, I mean, I think the faucet was a standard 2.2 gallon per minute faucet. So basically there were over 2 gallons of cold water just sitting in the pipes. And because the pipes went through the basement, they were going to cool off fast. And I knew the only way this dishwasher is actually going to wash well is if I use that high temp wash option. And so that's what I was in the habit of using it on. And I figured it was doing all these pre-washes because it has a microprocessor, it's relatively new, and it has a temperature sensor, and I figured it's using that to determine how hot the water actually is, and it keeps trying to refill itself with hotter water, but it's not getting any hotter, and so it finally gives up and moves on to the main wash. It wasn't until I discovered that chart with all the cycles on there that I realized, oh, that's just what it always does. And in a less nonsense house where there's a more modest run of piping, what this is going to do is every time it refills with hot water again, the temperature in there suddenly jumps up by 10 to 15 degrees. And so by the time it fills the 4th time, the water temperature in there is probably about 100 degrees. Then it switches on the heating element and elevates it even more, and then it moves on to the actual main wash. And because it does all that water changing and all that heating, it got rid of almost all of the peanut butter before the main detergent dispenser even opened. I did use pre-wash detergent. I used a teaspoon of Matt's formulation for this test, but most of it was probably drained away after 5 minutes. I think it's possible that like the work that the enzymes maybe started, like, no, I wouldn't think that's likely. I think it's possible that the detergent lingered, the effects of it lingered, is what I mean to say. I'm not testing this again without doing pre-wash detergent. But regardless, if there's something like peanut butter that can be melted with higher temperatures, the high temp wash option makes a huge difference. And yeah, basically, I was surprised how wildly different the high temp wash option is compared to the normal wash program, because it just says high temp wash. Why would you expect it to do more than increase the temperature of the wash? So that's basically what opened that rabbit hole. And between that and realizing that the chart doesn't actually explain anything, I figured I'll just go ahead and record every single cycle. So Here's that. Not we're gonna show you every single one, but I'm gonna go through this machine's cycles, explain what they all do, and also why its unmodified normal cycle is weirdly horrible. As often happens to me when I work without a script, I forgot to explain several things. So first, I just want to point out that when we are watching these cycle indicators here, the detergent dispenser light will light up 2 times during the cycle. First, when it dispenses detergent, and again when it dispenses rinse aid. In this machine, the detergent dispenser simply gets power 2 times, and I thought Big Clive made a video on this mechanism. I just looked for it, but I couldn't find it. So I may just be confusing it with his video on wax motors, because I'm 98% sure this dishwasher uses a wax motor to open the detergent dispenser. The reason I think that is because it sends power to the dispenser for a solid minute, and it takes like 20 seconds for the door to actually open. So what's probably happening is it's sending power to a heating element, which is melting some wax, and the wax actually pushes out a little stubby thing, which unlatches the door. And either when the door is shut, it doesn't dispense rinse aid, and then when the door is open, some mechanical doodad causes it to dispense rinse aid, or what I think is more likely, it just dispenses rinse aid twice. It puts a little rinse aid in the water when it delivers detergent, which is technically going to help wash a tiny little bit, but not really. But regardless, I just wanted to point out the detergent dispenser, it's one device that gets power 2 times, and it does 2 things. But I suspect it's delivering rinse aid 2 times. The other thing with the cycle indicators, when you see the wash light blink out for a brief period of time, that is how this dishwasher and many others changes which set of sprayers is actually getting water. It's a really clever little mechanism. Basically, the output of the wash pump, there's a little plastic ball that can slide back and forth, and it either blocks one passageway or another. And if it very briefly stops the pump, then the weight of the water moving back down into the sprayer, into the pump output, you know what I'm saying? The weight of the water pushes the ball backwards, and then when it turns the pump right back on, it plugs up the output to the main sprayers and it sends water out the back. I learned about this through a YouTube comment. I never looked into it. It's really clever. So what happens is you see it blink out for like a quarter of a second or a very brief period of time, and then it switches to the top sprayers. And then to switch back to the bottom sprayer, it has to stop for a couple of seconds, let all of the water slowly settle back down to the bottom, and then when it restarts, the ball will have moved back to its original position. It's a clever little mechanism. My dishwasher at home, because it has a third rack and the top rack has these twirly little spinner things, it actually has a 3-way valve in the bottom, and there's an actuator that moves a flapper of some kind to redirect the water. But in this machine, it's just this, it's devilishly simple. Same with the detergent dispenser, really. Appliances are so simple. Like, part of why I'm fascinated by them is because it's just, it's a very simple object, but the sequencing of what it does, it creates a very complicated and effective thing, if you know what I mean. So you see the main wash blink out like that. That's it switching between the 2 sets of sprayers. And a lot of dishwashers work like that. At least dishwashers that, you know, made in the last 20 years or so. If it still has a clockwork timer, I'm assuming, I think any dishwasher that has a clockwork timer, both sprayers work at the same time. And it wasn't until electronics took over that they could do that clever trick with the ball thing. And that's part of how dishwashers save water, but that's also part of why the cycle time has gotten much longer. I was doing a little research to figure out, okay, I know that water usage regulations are a thing with dishwashers, and this thing's normal wash cycle has some ridiculous behavior that I can only imagine is there because of those regulations. And I discovered the regulations were loosened in 2013. It seems like they got tightened in the early 2000s and then were loosened in 2013, which is very funny when you consider who was in office in the early 2000s and 2013. Just a little bit of irony there. for those that are always bent out of shape about water usage regulations. The 2013 thing was from Reddit, so I don't know how true that really is. But the point I want to make here is, even if you're grumbly about how water usage regulations affected dishwashers, it generally only affects the normal cycle. This thing's other cycles all use more water, but its light wash cycle only uses about 15% more water, and its energy saver cycle only uses about 11.5% more water. So those other cycles are not a huge increase in water usage, but which makes me think the main issue with this dishwasher is actually just whoever did the programming for the normal cycle doesn't understand what dishwashers do, because there are some absolutely nonsense decisions as far as what it does. But when I go through all these cycles, I'm going to give you the total fill time in minutes and seconds, and that is going to be the baseline water usage. The way these meter the water, the fill valve is a throttle, and so it should fill, according to the data sheet, at 0.87 gallons per minute. I have not verified that it is actually filling at that rate, but I know through all this filming exactly how long the fill valve is open throughout each of these cycles. And so I'm giving you a percentage of this is how much more these cycles use over the normal cycle. The datasheet claims the normal cycle uses 4.9 gallons. I feel like when I made my first video, it used a little over 5. I'll put the number up. I'll have to look that up. But so these are percentages over that amount. And here we go. So here's the problem with the normal wash cycle. And as I've gone through all these cycles, really, none of them are my version of ideal. I would like to mix some of them together. And, you know, because this dishwasher only has 6 components, the only thing I didn't put an indicator for was the vent, which closes when it's running. Because it only has 6 components, and they all run on 120 volts, you could very easily build a new control board for this thing and run your own software. You could do that for pretty much any dishwasher, but don't look for me to how to do that. And you have to be very careful if you're doing that. You need to really understand the sequencing of things and some of the limit switches and other things, but I'm just throwing that idea out there. It would be trivially easy to throw together an Arduino and a relay board and completely change how this dishwasher works. But with the programming that it came with, the normal wash has 4 minutes and 56 seconds of total fill time. It uses 1.07 kilowatt hours of energy, and it starts with a 15-minute pre-wash. That is the longest pre-wash of any of the cycles, but it is not heated at all. After the pre-wash, it drains that water out and does what I call a half-ass rinse. And this is what's nuts. I don't understand why it's doing this right now. I have no idea what this is going to do, but it opens its fill valve for just 26 seconds, which is only about a third of a full fill, and then runs the wash pump in these really brief pulses, which just throw a little bit of water at only the stuff in the bottom rack. Again, I don't know what this is supposed to do between the pre-wash and the main wash, and if I were designing this dishwasher, I would have just completely gotten rid of that. It could use even less water by not doing this step. Or what I would do is I would use that water and budget it for a different part of the cycle. But regardless, that's the second thing it does. After the pre-wash, it does this stupid half-ass rinse. I have no idea why. Then it actually completely fills and goes on to the main wash, which it spends 58 minutes in. I don't know why it's not an even hour, but it seems to be 58 minutes. The temperature peaks generally at around 130 Fahrenheit, but it is a fixed timer for how long it runs the heating element. So how hot it actually gets depends on how hot the water that it fills with is and everything else that's in the machine. After the main wash, it drains out and does another half-ass rinse. And this is the first, it calls it a pre-rinse, but again, it doesn't actually spray anything on the top rack. And because the next thing it does is a final rinse, anything that's in the main wash water that's stuck in the tubing or stuck in the top sprayers is going to be in the final rinse. That's the problem with the normal cycle. It's only doing 1.5 rinses, whereas every other cycle does at least 2. So this machine's normal cycle is just not good. But the basic stats are 4 minutes and 56 seconds of total fill time, 1.07 kilowatt hours of energy, a 15-minute pre-wash with a pretty much 1 hour main wash, but it's a fixed heating time, and then it does a terrible job rinsing. So don't use its normal cycle without a modifier because it's just bad. However, all of the other cycles use more water. If I didn't say this before, when we're talking about the cranky people about regulations, because those other cycles are there, those are options. And 2 of them only use a tiny bit more water, but also have 2 complete rinses. So if I were you, I would use those. But I forgot to make this note. The temperatures that this dishwasher gets on the inside it's at a disadvantage here because it's losing heat faster than it should. For one thing, it's just sitting out in open air, but also it's missing its sound insulation blanket. If this were actually installed in some cabinetry and it had that blanket, it would hold in its heat a little better. So understand that the normal wash might get well beyond 130 Fahrenheit if it were actually properly installed in a cabinet, but that I'm sure would only happen if you purged the water line and you were fairly lucky as far as how long the run of pipes was to your dishwasher. So the reason I'm saying that is the temperature differences are all relative. Throughout all this testing, the temperature in the room was pretty consistent. So the relativity is what's important, but I do have to acknowledge that it's losing heat faster than it should. The other thing to mention, I logged how many kilowatt hours of energy the dishwasher used, but because it's using hot water, the water heater is also using energy every time the dishwasher fills itself. And this gets really tricky to figure out energy costs because that's going to depend on the type of water heater you have. If you have an electric water heater, it's going to cost almost exactly the same. And that is actually an argument for not hooking up dishwashers to hot water. But again, they would need to have wildly different wash programs here in the US in order to actually do that effectively. But if you have a natural gas water heater, then the cost is going to be lower. If you have a heat pump water heater, the cost is going to be lower. So just understand that I'm only logging how much energy the dishwasher is pulling from the wall. When it uses more water, it's using more energy because your water heater has to replenish the water that it took out. Which is why it's extra funny that the energy saver cycle actually uses a little more water because it is actually going to be using a little more energy, on top of the fact that it doesn't save any energy from the normal cycle. That's not a spoiler. I said that in the main video. So anyway, so yeah, I just want to make sure I point out I'm logging the energy use of the dishwasher, but the water heater that's sitting on the floor next to it, every time the dishwasher pulls a gallon of water out of it, it's just a little 6-gallon point of use water heater. So it probably switches on every single time the dishwasher pulls water. But the benefit of that tiny water heater is it heats very quickly. So it's not like the water heater ever ran out of water during this, in case anybody had that thought. The entire cycle uses less water than what that water heater holds. But as I've already showed you, if you select the high temp wash modifier, everything goes nuts and it changes wildly. You go from 4 minutes and 56 seconds of total fill time to 9 minutes and 40 seconds of total fill time. That's a 95% increase in water usage. Yeah, that seems overkill, but that's what it does. The sequencing is a 5-minute pre-wash, then another 5-minute pre-wash, then another 5-minute pre-wash. They all have a complete fill. Then it moves on to a 10-minute pre-wash, which is actually heated. And then, by the way, I'm talking about the time that it actually spends washing. It takes 30 minutes to go into the main wash, but that's because the time it spends filling and draining, I'm not counting. So it's a 5-minute pre-wash, a 5-minute pre-wash, a 5-minute pre-wash, then a 10-minute heated pre-wash. Then when it drains that out, it does what I call a mini purge, where it runs the drain pump and opens the fill valve at the same time. The purpose of that is to get the last bit of water out from the sump. It's basically to create another slug of fresh water to push everything out. It does that in the normal wash cycle too, a couple times. And then it does something really weird. So after the 4th pre-wash, it fills again and then stops. It sits there with the heating element on, but without actually washing for 3 minutes. This makes no sense to me because anything that's above the heating element that happens to have some food stuff stuck on it is gonna get slightly baked by this. Who programmed this thing? But anyway, after that 3-minute pause of nothing but heat, it moves on to a 52-minute main wash with 45 minutes of heat. But there's an asterisk because on this cycle, it is actually trying to hit 140 Fahrenheit. So I observed the main temp wash peaked at 142, and then it seems to have a fixed timer where once it hits that temperature, it then keeps washing for a certain amount of time and then drains out. So the main wash time is going to vary when you are using the high temp wash option. But in this test, it was 52 minutes, 45 minutes of which were heated. After it drains that out, it goes on to an 8-minute heated pre-rinse, and then there's a final rinse, which is 49 minutes with 46 minutes of heat. So the total cycle time was 2 hours and 37 minutes. It had 7 complete fills of water with 3 mini purges, and none of those weird half-assed rinses. Again, that only happens with the unmodified normal cycle. So the high temp wash is a huge overkill over just normal wash. So then let's move on to the light wash. And here's where things start to get really strange. So the light wash used 1.21 kilowatt hours of energy. That's more than the normal wash. The high temp normal wash, if I didn't mention it, was 1.75 kilowatt hours. But again, I put an asterisk there because that's going to change depending on how long it takes to actually get to 140. For the light wash, it should be a fixed amount unless you select high temp. So the light wash was 1.21 kilowatt hours with 5 minutes and 40 seconds of total water fill time, which is only a 15% increase over the normal wash cycle. And its sequencing is a 5-minute pre-wash. I wish it were longer, but that's all you get. And then you move on to a 45-minute main wash with 40 minutes of heating time, and there's a small gap in the middle for some reason, who knows why. The observed temperature peak was 131.4, and then after the main wash, we had an 8-minute pre-rinse with a bit of heat in there for some reason, and then a 40-minute final rinse with 35 minutes of heat. Total cycle time was 1 hour and 45 minutes. This had 4 complete fills, 3 mini purges, but most importantly, 2 full rinses. So the light wash is going to rinse way better than the unmodified normal wash, even though it only uses 15% more water. This would honestly be my baseline wash cycle for this, except I wish it had a longer pre-wash. Again, I don't love anything. None of these cycles are ideal. But then you can do the high temp modifier on the light wash cycle. And here it actually makes sense because the only thing it does is make sure the main wash gets to 140 Fahrenheit. So the water usage was identical. It was within 1 frame, 5 minutes and 40 seconds of total fill time. The pre-wash was slightly shorter for some reason. I don't know why, but the main wash went to 1 hour and 4 minutes, and 59 minutes was heated. So again, it seems like it turns off the heating element and then drains 5 minutes later. The peak temperature was 140.5, so it actually hit 140. And then it did an identical pre-rinse, and the final rinse ended up being quite a bit longer too. I'm guessing this was just because whoever programmed it figured people would want some evidence that the high temp wash actually happened. Personally, I'm annoyed by that. I don't understand why it needs to make the final rinse go longer and heat longer, but it does. So it goes from a 40-minute final rinse to 1 hour and 5. So the total cycle time was 2 hours and 26 minutes, an hour or a half hour longer than the standard light wash cycle. And the observed energy use was 1.75 kilowatt hours. Again though, asterisk, that will change. It's not fixed like it is in the light wash. So honestly, if I were using this dishwasher as my everyday machine, I would use the light wash with the high temp. That would be my normal cycle. I think that's its best balance between water usage and energy usage and performance. To point something out I haven't pointed out yet, I don't know how common enzyme-based detergents were when this dishwasher was made. And so I think they were basically just starting to come on the market. So that might also be why the target temperature is only if you select high temp wash. Regardless, that's what it is. My personal advice, if you have this dishwasher, use the light wash cycle with high temp wash selected most of the time. That's going to be its best cycle. If you have a really dirty load, then I would use the normal wash with the high temp wash selected. Okay, so then we have the energy saver cycle. Infuriatingly, this uses the exact same amount of energy as the normal cycle. Actually, it may be slightly more, but it was 1.07 versus 1.08, so I'm going to consider that a rounding error, especially because if the voltage were a little higher during that test, it would use a little more energy. The energy saver had 5 minutes and 30 seconds total fill time, which is 11.5% increase. The savings of 10 seconds comes from the fact that it only does 2 mini purges rather than 3. So the energy saver cycle is pretty much the same cycle as the light wash. It is a 4-minute pre-wash. Then the only real difference is it doesn't do a mini purge after the pre-wash. Then it moves directly to the main wash, which was 42 minutes, 37 minutes of which were heated. The observed temperature peak was 127. Then it went on to an 8-minute pre-rinse with some heat and a 35-minute final rinse with 30 minutes of heat. Total cycle time was 1 hour and 40 minutes, 4 complete fills, 2 mini purges. That is incredibly similar to the light wash. It's basically 4 minutes shorter, 1 less mini purge, and the wash time was 3 minutes shorter. So they're almost the exact same cycle. However, if you do the high temp option with the energy saver, nothing changes as far as its water usage or the cycling, but it makes, again, both the main wash and the final rinse a little longer. The main wash is 50 minutes with 45 minutes of heat, and the final wash, or the final rinse, is 45 minutes with 40 minutes of heat. Here, however, I do not believe it is trying to hit 140. The observed temperature peak was 135.3, and the fact that the main wash was 50 minutes exactly with 45 minutes exactly of heat seems to me like that's just another fixed timer. So the energy saver with the high temp wash selected is really basically just heating a little longer. It's not actually trying to go for a target temperature. So the energy saver cycle on this thing is dumb. It is not really doing anything different from the light wash, and the high temp option doesn't work as well as the light wash. So never use the energy saver cycle because it's dumb. Yeah, it saves a tiny bit of water, that's it. And it uses more water than the normal wash, which is great. Okay, then the last new cycle was the heavy wash, which here, first note, high temp wash is on by default and you can't turn it off. So the heavy wash cycle is always going to go to at least 140 Fahrenheit. It had 10 minutes and 2 seconds of total fill time, which is a 103% increase over the normal wash, so it's a little more than high temp normal. And this is what is really annoying, it starts with just a 3-minute pre-wash. So if you want the heavy wash cycle, and you want to use pre-wash detergent, it's not really helping that much. So it starts with a 3-minute pre-wash, goes to a 6-minute pre-wash with a mini purge afterwards, then a 7-minute heated pre-wash, and then it moves on to the main wash. So the heavy wash has 1 less pre-wash than high temp light, but it has another rinse. It has, does it have 3 rinses? One. Yeah, yes, it has 4 rinses. So the heavy wash has 1 less pre-wash, but 2 more rinses. It loves to rinse. I don't really, again, why? I mean, maybe if you actually had a load like I put in there with all that peanut butter, you need 4 rinses, but that seems excessive. So anyway, the heavy wash sequence, it's a little more water, 3-minute pre-wash, 6-minute pre-wash, 7-minute heated pre-wash, then a 50-minute main wash, 50 main wash, with between 45 and 48 minutes of heat. I wrote it that way because it did the same, just heating for no reason for a while. The observed temperature peak was 141.1. Then we move on to a 7-minute pre-rinse, a 7-minute pre-rinse with 2 minutes of heating, a 7-minute pre-rinse which is heated throughout, and then a 55-minute final rinse with 50 minutes of heat. All of these cycles, I wonder why it's heating so much in the final rinse, but whatever. So the total cycle time for the heavy wash was 2 hours and 49 minutes, had 8 complete fills of water with 3 mini purges, and used 1.78 kilowatt hours of energy. But again, there's an asterisk because that's going to change depending on what's in there, how hot the water comes in. It's trying to hit 140 degrees. So those are all the cycles. Nope, that's not all. I forgot to talk about 2 things. First, I did film what this thing does when you select the delay start option because I wanted to know, is it going to try to heat the pre-wash or do something to help compensate for the fact that you're not going to be able to purge the water line before it starts itself? And the answer, at least for this model, is no. So for those of you out there that use the delay start option, you probably need to select the high temp wash modifier or something in order for your dishwasher to actually wash as well as if you had purged the water line before you started it. And personally, I'm very annoyed that this dishwasher works like that because it basically means the delay start option is either useless or you have to select a cycle which is going to use way more water. So again, this is just one dishwasher model. There's nothing to suggest that all dishwashers work like this, but the cycle ran identically to if it were just the standard normal cycle. Now, I will say I had it hooked up to hot water, and because the water heater is right next to the sink, here it got hot water right away, and I suppose it's possible its program would have realized that, but I doubt it based on everything else we've seen. The other thing I tested was what changes when you select the sanitize option. On this machine, you can only select sanitize on the normal wash or the heavy wash. And when you select sanitize, it forces on high temp wash. So with this machine, sanitize is going to do way more washing, way more rinsing. It's going to use about double the amount of water as the standard light wash with the high temp option selected. But the reason why I wanted to test this really was because the button says sanitize wash, and really it should probably sanitize the final rinse. And another thing I wanted to test with this was the datasheet says the sanitized light will only come on if it actually meets the sanitized temperature by the end of the cycle. And it did not come on when I did this test. And this is another point to suggest that it's losing too much heat in this situation. It was ideally situated as far as getting hot water right away, but sitting out in open air like this, it's just losing too much heat, and it looks like it's programmed to only run the heating element for an hour, and if it doesn't meet the sanitized temperature by that time, it gives up and will not light up the sanitized light. But in general, the only thing the sanitize option does is it extends the final rinse and makes sure that the final rinse hits, I think it's 150. Let me check the data sheet. Yeah, the data sheet says 150 Fahrenheit plus or minus 5 degrees. So it is looking for the final wash temperature to reach 150. If it does, it will light the sanitized light, but if it doesn't, it will not light the sanitized light. But that's the only difference. The final rinse is extended with more heat to try to hit 150. In this case, it did not hit that, but it's because it's sitting in open air in a somewhat cold warehouse rather than wrapped in a blanket under some cabinets. So those are all the cycles. They're all so different. Well, the energy saver and the light wash are very similar, but if you have a dishwasher that you're not happy with and you're not trying the other cycles, you gotta try the other cycles. And I don't mean to say that like, why are you being so incurious or whatever? It doesn't make sense that this dishwasher's high temp wash would change so much. So what I mean is, seriously, try the other cycles because they may not do what they say they do. It might not make any sense. It's kind of maddening that the dishwasher it behaves like this. And like I said, if I were programming it, I would not have done any of this. Here's what I would do. If I had this dishwasher, I would have it do a 15-minute pre-wash. I might even add some heat when that happens. I think there might be some logic of not heating the pre-wash water because like it might burn some stuff on the heating element, maybe. But regardless, I would do a 15-minute pre-wash, then move directly to the main wash with a mini purge. I would not that stupid half-assed rinse. I mean, just drain that water out, open the fill valve for a while draining, then go right to the main wash. Do that for an hour, hit 45, make sure you hit 140. Then drain out the main wash water, do one pre-rinse, drain that out, and then do a final rinse. I think it should just be 4 fills of water, not 3.5 or whatever weird nonsense it's doing. So for this dishwasher, I'm repeating myself, but my general advice would be light wash with the high temp wash selected is probably the best cycle, the best balance for 99% of wash loads. If you have really difficult stuff, you can use the normal wash with high temp selected, but that is almost the same thing as the heavy wash option, which uses much, much more water than the light wash option. So, I think that's the end. If you don't have to install blinking lights like I did. You can just listen to what your dishwasher is doing. It would be helpful to have a temperature data logger or something if you wanted to verify the temperatures that it gets to. But yeah, the cycles are so much more different than you might think depending on the dishwasher you have. And that's what's frustrating about this and about this whole concept is not only have dishwashers evolved over time, but dishwasher detergent has evolved over time. And now that the market is like 98% pods, dishwasher manufacturers are probably skewing their programs more towards a single dose of detergent, which annoys the crap out of me. But it also means, right, that I'm very, basically my suspicion is that you could use way less detergent if you had a longer pre-wash and a longer, hotter main wash, and you actually used two small detergent doses. The difficulty here is all these variables are changing at the same time. And so if you have a dishwasher that's like 15 years old, perhaps it has a really bad normal cycle because the water regulations were too strict. But then if you have a dishwasher that was just made, like my KitchenAid at home, it only does a 10-minute pre-wash, which honestly is probably fine. Given how quickly the butter released, that's probably fine. But I would like the pre-wash to be heated, personally. Unless there's a reason that would damage the heating element, I would like the pre-wash to be heated. I do not know whether my KitchenAid at home heats the pre-wash water or not, actually, because I don't have... Well, actually, I think it's just plugged in under the kitchen sink, so I could plug it into a kilowatt. I should probably do that. I don't have a load of dishes to run tonight, so that's not happening before this video gets uploaded. If I could, I would do it, but no. Although I say that as if I didn't just run 10 cycles with nothing through. Anyway, if you put me in charge of designing a dishwasher, and I keep repeating myself, it took a lot longer to compile all this stuff than I thought it was going to, so I'm here later than I wanted to be. But it's just, it's hard to know, right? I don't want to use pods, ever. I want loose powder. That's just what I want to use. So it's frustrating not knowing that our newer dishwashers being designed to avoid the pre-wash cycle because so many products just don't allow you to do that. And remember, we've uncovered those little samples of detergent you get when you buy a dishwasher. The manufacturers are being paid by the detergent, the co-marketing agreements, as they say on the #1 recommended brand or whatever, as the result of co-marketing agreements. Those recommendations are not because they're actually testing these detergent products. It's because the name brands are saying, hey, suggest this. So it's really difficult to know, right? If all the if the big detergent companies out there are only putting their best foot forward on their high-priced products that are pre-dosed, then it could very well be that the dishwasher manufacturers are just trying to make their machines work best with that reality. And those of us that actually understand what dishwashers do and want to optimize the amount of detergent for the sequence that is ideal are just screwed. And so that's the main reason I'm happiest there's another powder option, and we have proven powders are only bad because the manufacturers don't want them to be good. It seems like anyway. And this would follow with my experience, which is genuinely, I have consistently better results buying store brand powders than name brand powders. I had previously I know I had one batch of a name brand. I've talked about this before, but again, I'm avoiding naming brands just in case, given what I'm talking about now. But I have had one box of a name brand powder which left a horrible residue, and that never happened, has never happened, with Walmart's Great Value powder. And when you consider that Walmart doesn't have the incentive to make their powder worse than their alternatives that other companies do, again, it doesn't seem like my experience is that outlandish. I'll just put it that way. But thanks for watching. I think this is the capstone to the dishwasher saga. Unless I don't know what else I could do. We've proved it. Bad detergents are bad, not because they're powders, but because they want them to be. And I don't know. I just think the world would be a little better if you let people control things and you were helping people understand their machines. And I have gotten I got some feedback from Patreon members in Europe that yeah, the European market is moving away from pre-wash because they're really trying to clamp down on water usage. And I gotta say, I don't like having this opinion, but if you're trying to get a dishwasher to use less than 5 gallons of water, you might be going a little too far. It's kind of nuts to me that we're trying to make dishwashers use so little water when if you take a 5-minute shower, you'll have used more water than a dishwasher. Almost certainly. Unless you have a really low flow shower head, you're gonna have used less water because the fill valve on this is 0.87 gallons per minute. So if you have a 2 gallon per minute shower head, it's more than double the flow rate. So a 5-minute shower is more water than its worst cycles. Anyway, that's more like an opinion, but I don't like having this opinion, but I do think we might be going a little too far with dishwashers, especially because, right, rinsing is important, not just for the cleanliness of the dishes, but pipes. You're gonna have sludge buildup over time if you're not using enough water to rinse things. So I don't know. I don't know what the standards are for toilet flushing in Europe now, but I think here they're down to 1.1 gallons per flush, or is it 1.2? But it's still, to me, it's just okay, I typically flush the toilet 3 times a day, something like that, just me. So one person's typical toilet usage can be a whole family's nightly dishwasher usage if it uses 5 gallons of water. I don't know. I just think dishwashers might be getting a little too strangled in ways that are bad for the purpose of washing dishes. So I don't know. I actually do think it might be worth reevaluating those water regulations for those of you in Europe. And whatever they are now, and now here, I think they've been loosened even more. But certainly 5 gallons per wash load could be great. You really just need 2 complete rinses. The nonsense this Frigidaire is trying to do is completely ineffective. But now I'm gonna stop. Bye!